The morning mist clung to the Colorado Rockies like a whispered prayer, and Marcus Sullivan stood at the edge of Clear Creek, his massive frame silhouetted against the dawn sky. At 6 feet 8 inches, he was a man who commanded attention without trying, but this morning he felt smaller than he had in years. The silence around him was complete, not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the hollow emptiness that had followed him for 15 long years. He cupped his left ear instinctively, a habit he'd developed since the explosion in Afghanistan had stolen half his hearing and, with it, his love for the one thing that had always brought him joy: music. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had inherited the Sullivan Ranch from his grandfather 5 years ago, along with 8-year-old Tommy, his sister's boy who'd lost both parents in a car accident. The ranch sprawled across 300 acres of some of the most beautiful land in Colorado, but beauty didn't pay the bills. Cattle prices had dropped, drought had shortened the grazing season, and the bank was breathing down his neck. He'd been contemplating selling to the developers who circled like vultures, offering cash for land they'd turn into another soulless subdivision. The creek gurgled softly beside him, and Marcus closed his eyes, trying to remember what music used to sound like in stereo. He'd been a different man then, someone who played guitar around campfires, who could hear the harmony in a meadowlark song. The man who'd left for his 3rd tour of duty had believed in tomorrow. The man who'd come back believed only in getting through today. A splash in the creek snapped his attention back to the present. Downstream, about 50 yards away, a figure sat on a fallen log with their feet dangling in the water. Marcus squinted, his good right ear picking up something that made his breath catch. Someone was humming, not loudly, but with a purity that seemed to make the very air shimmer. The melody was haunting, unfamiliar, yet it stirred something deep in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. He moved closer, his boots silent on the pine needles carpeting the forest floor. The figure resolved into a woman, probably in her early 30s, with long dark hair that caught the early sunlight. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days, but there was something about the way she held herself that suggested grace beneath the weariness. Her humming grew more confident, and then, so softly he almost missed it, she began to sing. The words were in Spanish, a lullaby perhaps, and Marcus felt his knees go weak. He hadn't heard anyone really sing, with soul and intention, since before the explosion. The woman's voice was like water in a drought, like the first sunrise after the longest night. It wasn't just beautiful, it was healing, reaching places in his spirit that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten they existed. Elena Rodriguez had been walking for 3 days straight, following game trails and creek beds to avoid the main roads. Her car had finally given up outside of Denver, and she'd taken it as a sign. She'd been running for 2 years now, not from the law but from herself, from the expectations and the memories that chased her like shadows. The isolated creek seemed like as good a place as any to rest, to wash the dust from her feet and perhaps find a moment's peace. She'd never intended to sing again. The voice that had once filled opera houses and brought audiences to tears had been silenced by trauma, by betrayal, by the kind of heartbreak that reaches so deep it changes your molecular structure. But sitting by the clear water, with mountains standing guard around her and no human ear to judge, the song had emerged on its own. It was her grandmother's lullaby, the one that had comforted her through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. The melody flowed from her lips like water from a spring, and for the first time in years, Elena felt something approaching. Peace. She'd lost everything: her career, her home, her identity. But here, in this moment, she was simply a woman singing by a creek, and that felt like enough. A twig snapped behind her, and Elena's voice died instantly. She spun around, her body tensing for flight, and found herself looking up at the largest man she'd ever seen. He stood maybe 20 feet away, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. But her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, kind eyes the color of mountain pine, a face that spoke of honesty and hard work. But Elena had learned not to trust first impressions. "Please don't stop," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been 15 years since I heard a woman sing." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Elena studied his face, searching for signs of threat or deception, but found only a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own. There was something broken in this giant. Of a man, something that resonated with the shattered places in her own soul. "I shouldn't be here," she said, gathering her worn backpack and preparing to flee. "This is private property, isn't it?" Marcus nodded slowly, but made no move to. "Come closer." "It is. But you're welcome to stay as long as you need." He gestured toward the vast expanse of ranch land stretching beyond the trees. "There's more space here than one man and a boy can ever use." Elena hesitated, one foot already pointed toward the path that would take her back to her wandering. She'd perfected the art of moving on, of never staying long enough to matter or be mattered to. But something in the man's tone gave her pause. He wasn't making demands or asking questions. He was simply offering space, the most precious gift anyone could give to someone who'd been running. "My name is Marcus Sullivan," he continued, settling himself carefully on a boulder a respectful distance away. "This is my ranch, or what's left of it. And you don't have to tell me anything about yourself that you don't want to. But if you're hungry or tired or just need a place to sit by the water for a while, you're welcome here." Elena found herself studying this unexpected figure more carefully. Up close, she could see the slight way he tilted his head to favor his right ear, the calluses on his hands that spoke of honest labor, the weariness around his eyes that suggested he was no stranger to sleepless nights. There was no calculation in his offer, no sense that he expected payment or explanation. It was perhaps the purest kindness she'd encountered in years. "Elena," she said finally, offering only her first name. "And I." She paused and used to accepting help. "I suppose I am tired." Marcus's smile transformed his entire face, revealing the man he must have been before whatever had carved those lines of sadness around his eyes. "There's a cabin down by the main house that's been empty for years. Used to be for ranch hands, but it's clean and the roof doesn't leak. You could rest there if you wanted." The offer was beyond generous, but Elena's survival instincts kicked in. She'd learned to be wary of men who offered too much too quickly. "I don't have money to pay rent," she said carefully, "and I don't want charity." "Wasn't thinking of either," Marcus replied. "But if it would make you more comfortable. There's always work to be done around here. My nephew Tommy could use help with his schoolwork. He's 8 and smart as a whip, but struggles with reading. And the ranch." He gestured around them with a slight shrug. "Well, let's just say I could use an extra pair of hands with just about everything." Elena found herself considering the offer more seriously than she should have. The logical part of her mind, the part that had kept her safe for 2 years of wandering, urged her to decline politely and move on. But another part, a part she'd thought was permanently silenced, whispered that maybe it wouldn't hurt to stay just for a few days. Just long enough to rest and gather strength for the next leg of her journey. "I used to teach," she heard herself saying, surprising them both. Before I did other things. I could help your nephew with his reading." Marcus's eyes lit up with something approaching hope. "Tommy would love that. He's had a hard time since his parents died, and he's been asking questions about things I don't know how to answer. Having a woman around might." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He trailed off, realizing how presumptuous that sounded. "I mean, if you're comfortable with children." "I like children," Elena said, and it was true. They were honest in ways adults had forgotten how to be, and they didn't expect her to be anyone other than who she was in the moment. "What happened to his parents?" "Car accident 3 years ago," Marcus said quietly. "They were my sister and brother-in-law. Good people. Tommy came to live with me because there wasn't anyone else, but I'm not sure I'm what he needs. I'm better with cattle than kids most days." There was such honest concern in his voice that Elena felt something soften in her chest. Here was a man who'd taken on responsibility for a child not out of obligation but out of love, and who worried that his best wasn't good enough. It was a kind of selflessness she'd rarely encountered. "Children need stability and kindness more than perfection," she said gently. "It sounds like you're giving him both." Marcus looked surprised by the reassurance, as if he'd been expecting criticism rather than support. "Some days I wonder. He hasn't spoken much since the accident, and lately he's been having nightmares. The school counselor says it's normal, but watching him struggle." He shook his head. "I'd give anything to take that pain away from him." Elena recognized the weight of carrying someone else's healing. She'd tried to do the same for people she'd loved and had learned the hard way that some wounds could only be healed from the inside. But that didn't stop the urge to try, especially when it came to children who hadn't asked for their trauma. Maybe he just needs time, she said, and people who won't give up on him. You sound like you know something about that. Marcus observed carefully, not quite making it a question. Elena tensed slightly, her defenses rising automatically. But when she looked at Marcus, she saw only gentle curiosity, not the invasive probing she'd learned to fear. We all carry things, she said finally. Some of us just carry them longer than others. Marcus nodded, accepting her non-answer with a grace that surprised her. The cabin's about a quarter-mile through those trees, he said, pointing toward a well-worn path. Has its own well, a wood stove for heat, and enough space for privacy. No obligations, no expectations. Just a place to rest if you need one. Elena found herself standing before she'd consciously made the decision. Her body was making choices her mind wasn't ready to commit to, but perhaps that was for the best. Logic had been her companion for too long, and it had led her only to loneliness and endless movement. Just for a day or two, she said, as much to herself as to him. Until I figure out where I'm going next. Of course, Marcus agreed, though something in his expression suggested he hoped she might reconsider that timeline. Tommy gets home from school around 3:30. He rides the bus to the end of the main drive and walks up to the house. If you wanted to meet him, I could introduce you then. The casual way he included her in the day's routine made Elena's chest tighten with something she couldn't name. It had been so long since anyone had made space for her in their life, even temporarily. I'll think about it, she said, shouldering her backpack. As she started toward the path Marcus had indicated, his voice stopped her. Elena. She turned back to find him still seated on the boulder, his expression carefully neutral. Thank you. For the song, I mean. I'd forgotten what music could sound like. The simple gratitude in his words hit her harder than any applause she'd ever received. She'd spent years performing for crowds who appreciated her technique, her training, her ability to hit impossible notes with precision. But Marcus had heard something else entirely. Not performance, but pure expression, the song singing itself through her rather than being forced from her throat. You're welcome, she said softly, then turned and walked into the forest before the moment could become too heavy to carry. The path wound through stands of aspen and pine, dappled sunlight creating patterns on the ground that shifted with each breath of wind. Elena let herself focus on the immediate sensations, the crunch of pine needles under her boots, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs, the distant sound of cattle lowing somewhere beyond the trees. It was easier than thinking about the decision she'd just made or the way Marcus's eyes had looked when he'd asked her not to stop singing. The cabin emerged from the trees like something from a fairy tale. Small but well-maintained, with a covered porch and windows that caught the morning light. Someone had taken care of this place, even in its emptiness. The steps were solid, the door painted a cheerful blue, and window boxes held the remnants of summer flowers that suggested ongoing attention. Elena climbed the porch steps and tried the door, finding it unlocked as Marcus had implied it would be. The interior was simple but complete. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area with a hand pump for water, and a sleeping alcove with a bed covered by a quilt that looked handmade. Everything was clean and ready for occupancy, as if Marcus had been hoping for a guest even before one appeared. She set her backpack on the single chair and walked to the window that looked back toward the creek. Through the trees, she could just make out the boulder where Marcus had been sitting, though he was no longer there. The view was peaceful, framed by mountains that seemed to guard the valley like ancient sentinels. For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to imagine staying in one place long enough to watch the seasons change. The thought scared her almost as much as it appealed to her. Movement had been her protection, never staying long enough to be found or to find herself caring too much about the people she left behind. But standing in this quiet cabin, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant murmur of the creek, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed, the possibility of rest. A knock at the door made her jump, her heart immediately racing, with the instinctive fear that had become her constant companion. But when she opened it, she found not a threat, but a boy who could only be Tommy. He was small for 8, with Marcus's dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. In his hands, he carried a plate covered with a kitchen towel. Uncle Max said you might be hungry, Tommy said quietly, offering her the plate. Mrs. Henderson from down the road brought us more cookies than we can eat. Elena accepted the offering, touched by the thoughtfulness. Thank you, Tommy. That's very kind. The boy lingered on the porch, clearly curious but too polite to invite himself in. Elena recognized the look. He was a child who'd learned to read adult moods carefully, to gauge safety before committing to interaction. It was a skill she wished he'd never needed to develop. Would you like to come in for a minute? She asked gently. I was just looking at the view. Tommy's face brightened slightly, and he stepped inside with the careful manners of a child who'd been taught to respect other people's spaces. He went immediately to the window Elena had been looking through and pointed toward a group of buildings. In the distance, that's our house, he said. And the big building is the barn where we keep the horses and some of the cattle when it's cold. Uncle Max says we have the best land in the whole county, but… He trailed off, his expression becoming uncertain. But what? Elena prompted gently. Tommy looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too serious for his age. But sometimes I hear him on the phone talking about money and selling. He doesn't know I listen, but I do. I don't want to move again. I like it here. The child's honesty pierced Elena's heart. Here was another person whose security was threatened, who faced the possibility of losing the only stability he'd known. She found herself sitting down so she could be at his eye level, an instinct from her teaching days that came back without thought. Have you talked to your uncle about what you heard? She asked. Tommy shook his head. He works really hard, and he's always tired. I don't want to make him more worried. The boy's consideration for Marcus's feelings spoke volumes about the relationship between them. Despite Marcus's concerns about his parenting abilities, he'd clearly raised a child who was both caring and perceptive. Sometimes adults worry about things that never happen, Elena said carefully. And sometimes talking about worries makes them smaller instead of bigger. Tommy considered this with the gravity of a child who'd learned to think before speaking. Are you going to stay? He asked suddenly, changing the subject with the directness that only children could manage. Elena felt herself floundering. She'd intended to give him a careful non-answer, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't asking out of mere curiosity. There was hope in the question, fragile and quickly hidden, but real nonetheless. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'm someone who moves around a lot. But I'm here now, and if your uncle is okay with it, maybe I could help you with your reading while I am. Tommy's entire demeanor shifted, a light entering his eyes that transformed his serious little face. Really? I'm not very good at it. The words get all jumbled up sometimes. That happens to lots of people, Elena assured him. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means your brain processes things differently. There are ways to work with that. The boy's expression suggested that adults didn't usually speak to him with such straightforward respect for his intelligence. Could we start today? He asked eagerly. I have homework, but it's hard and Uncle Mac tries to help, but he… Tommy stopped himself, loyalty to his uncle warring with his desire for assistance. Why don't you bring your homework over after you've had a snack? Elena suggested. We can look at it together. Tommy practically bounced with excitement, then caught himself and resumed his careful politeness. Thank you, Miss Elena. I'll be really good, I promise. I'm sure you will be, Elena said, walking him to the door. But Tommy, you don't have to be perfect. Learning means making mistakes, and that's okay. As she watched the boy run back toward the main house, Elena felt something shifting inside her chest. She'd told herself she was just resting here, just passing through as she had everywhere else. But already she was making commitments, offering help, allowing herself to care about this child's education and this man's struggles with his ranch. It was dangerous territory, caring about people. You planned to leave. But as she looked out at the mountains surrounding the valley, Elena couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, this might be the place where her running finally came to an end. Part 2. The catalyst encounter that afternoon, Tommy arrived at Elena's cabin door with a backpack nearly as large as he was and a determined expression that reminded her strongly of his uncle. His homework consisted of a reading comprehension worksheet about pioneers that had clearly frustrated him. Pencil marks had been erased so many times the paper was thin in places, and his answers were sparse. I can read some of the words, Tommy explained, settling cross-legged on the cabin floor where Elena had spread out a blanket to serve as their workspace. But when I put them all together, they don't make sense anymore. It's like my brain forgets the beginning by the time I get to the end. Elena recognized the signs immediately. During her teaching years in Denver, she'd worked with many children who struggled with similar processing challenges. "Let's try something different," she said, pulling out a piece of blank paper. "Instead of reading the whole paragraph at once, let's break it into smaller pieces." She wrote out the first sentence in large, clear letters, leaving extra space between each word. Then she had Tommy read it aloud slowly, covering up everything except the word he was currently reading. The difference was immediate. His confidence grew with each successful word, and by the end of the sentence, he was grinning with pride. "I did it," he exclaimed, then immediately looked embarrassed by his enthusiasm. "I mean, it was just one sentence. Just one sentence." Elena repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Tommy, that sentence had 17 words in it, including some pretty challenging ones like territory and expedition. That's not just anything." They worked together for nearly 2 hours, with Elena patiently breaking down each paragraph and celebrating every small victory. Tommy's natural intelligence shone through once the words stopped being obstacles. He had insightful questions about why pioneers would leave everything behind to travel west, and he drew connections between their hardships and the ranch life. He knew. "My great-great-grandfather came west too," Tommy said as they finished the last question. "Uncle Mac says he built the first cabin on this land with nothing but an axe and determination." "Do you think he was scared?" "I think anyone who leaves everything familiar behind has to be at least a little scared," Elena replied thoughtfully. "But maybe that's what makes them brave, doing it anyway." Tommy considered this with the gravity he brought to all serious subjects. "Are you scared?" he asked suddenly. "You left everything behind too, didn't you?" The question caught Elena off guard. Children had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things that adults spent years dancing around. "Yes," she said honestly. "I'm scared sometimes. But I'm also discovering that new places can surprise you in good ways." "Like finding us?" Tommy asked hopefully. Elena felt her throat tighten. This child had already been through so much loss. She couldn't let him build hopes around her staying when she wasn't even sure herself what tomorrow might bring. "Like finding good people when you need them most," she said carefully. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of boots on the porch steps. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his massive frame filling the entrance as he knocked gently on the open door. His clothes were dusty from a day's work, and there was a slight tightness around his eyes that suggested concern. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his gaze taking in the homework spread across the blanket and Tommy's obvious contentment. "But when this one didn't come home after school, I figured I'd better check." "We were doing homework," Tommy announced proudly, scrambling to his feet. "Miss Elena taught me a trick for reading, and I finished the whole assignment. All by myself." Marcus's expression shifted to something Elena couldn't quite identify: surprise, gratitude, and perhaps a touch of something that might have been relief. "All by yourself?" he repeated, glancing at Elena. "That's quite an accomplishment." "He just needed a different approach," Elena said, standing and brushing dust from her jeans. "Tommy's very bright. The standard teaching methods just weren't working with how his brain processes information." "I've been worried about his struggles in school," Marcus admitted quietly. "The teacher says he's behind, but I know he's smart. I just didn't know how to help him." Elena saw an opportunity to ease some of the guilt she'd heard in his voice earlier. Children learn in different ways. What works for one doesn't work for all. Tommy just needs information presented in smaller chunks, with more visual breaks. It's actually quite common. Tommy had returned to packing up his school supplies, but Elena noticed he was listening intently to the adult conversation. Children always did, she'd learned, especially children who'd experienced uncertainty. They monitored adult emotions like tiny weather forecasters, constantly checking for signs of storms ahead. "Could I ask you something?" Marcus said hesitantly. "Tommy's teacher wants to meet with me next week about his progress. Would you?" He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. "Would you consider coming with me? I'd value your professional opinion, and Tommy clearly responds to your teaching style." The request was reasonable, even generous in its inclusion of her expertise. But it also represented another step deeper into their lives, another thread connecting her to this place and these people. Elena felt the familiar urge to deflect, to maintain the distance that had kept her safe for so long. I don't know how long I'll be staying, she said carefully, aware that Tommy had gone very still beside his backpack. Of course, Marcus said quickly. I understand you have your own plans. I just thought. He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that spoke of frustration with himself. What Uncle Mac means, Tommy said suddenly, his voice small but determined, is that nobody's helped me with school stuff like you did today. And maybe if the teacher understood about my brain being different, she wouldn't think I was dumb anymore. The quiet dignity in the boy's words hit Elena like a physical blow. Here was a child advocating for himself, explaining his needs with a maturity that broke her heart. How many times had he sat in classrooms feeling stupid because the teaching methods didn't match his learning style? You are absolutely not dumb, Elena said firmly, kneeling down at Tommy's level. You're intelligent and creative and kind. Any teacher who suggests otherwise doesn't understand how learning works. Tommy's eyes brightened, but he continued to watch her face carefully. So you'll come to the meeting? Elena found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. Yes, I'll come to the meeting. We'll make sure your teacher understands how to help you succeed. The smile that transformed Tommy's face was worth every alarm bell going off in Elena's head about getting too involved. Marcus's expression of gratitude was almost overwhelming in its sincerity. Thank you, he said quietly. This means more than you know. As they walked back toward the main house together, Tommy skipping ahead to show his uncle something he'd spotted in the grass, Marcus fell into step beside Elena. The evening light was beginning to slant across the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He hasn't been this excited about school since he started living with me, Marcus said softly. I've been so worried about failing him. You're not failing him, Elena replied with conviction. You're loving him, providing for him, giving him stability. That's the foundation everything else builds on. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Elena sensed he was working up to saying something difficult. Can I ask you something personal? He finally said. You mentioned you used to teach. What made you stop? Elena felt her defensive walls rising automatically. This was the question she'd been dreading, the one that required her to reveal more than she was ready to share. Things changed, she said vaguely, hoping he'd accept the non-answer. But Marcus had apparently learned to read between lines during his years caring for a traumatized child. Bad things, he asked gently. The kind that make a person want to keep moving? Elena stopped walking, surprised by his perceptiveness. They were near the main house now, close enough that she could see warm light glowing in the windows and smell something savory cooking. It looked like the kind of home she'd once dreamed of having, secure, welcoming, filled with love despite its current struggles. Some things break you in ways that take a long time to heal, she said finally. If they heal at all. Marcus nodded, his expression understanding rather than curious. I know something about that. After Afghanistan, I couldn't listen to music for 3 years. Couldn't stand any sound louder than conversation. The world felt too sharp, too chaotic. I thought I'd never find peace again. Elena looked at him with new understanding. She'd noticed the way he favored his right ear, but she hadn't realized the depth of what he'd experienced. What changed? She asked. Tommy, mostly, Marcus said, his gaze following his nephew who was now examining something by the porch steps with intense concentration. Kids have a way of pulling you into the present moment. They need you to be there with them, not lost in the past or worried about the future. It forced me to find ways to cope. And the music? Marcus's smile was self-deprecating. Still working on that. But hearing you sing this morning. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. It was the first time in 15 years that music felt like healing instead of hurt. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of defenses she'd maintained for so long they'd become part of her identity. Here was someone who understood what it meant to have something you loved stolen by trauma, who knew the long journey back to wholeness. I stopped singing professionally 2 years ago, she heard herself saying. There was an incident. Someone I trusted betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. It changed how I felt about performing, about being vulnerable in front of people. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, and Elena suspected he was reading between the lines of her careful phrasing. I'm sorry, he said simply. Whatever happened, I'm sorry it took something you loved away from you. The lack of questions, the absence of pressure for details, was exactly what Elena needed. Too many people wanted the full story, the dramatic details that would satisfy their curiosity. Marcus offered only understanding and the space to share or not share as she chose. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's been difficult, learning who you are when the thing that defined you is gone." "But it's not gone," Marcus said with quiet certainty. "I heard it this morning. Whatever they took from you, they didn't take your voice. That's still yours." Tommy chose that moment to come running back to them, his hands cupped carefully around something small. "Look," he exclaimed, opening his palms to reveal a perfect arrowhead made of black obsidian. "I found it right by our front steps. Uncle Mac, do you think it's really old?" Marcus examined the artifact with appropriate seriousness, though Elena could see the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Could be," he agreed. "The Ute people lived in this valley for hundreds of years before the first ranchers arrived. That might have been made by one of their hunters." "Can I keep it?" Tommy asked eagerly. "I could start a collection. As long as you remember that it belonged to someone else first," Marcus said. "We're just taking care of it for a while." Elena was struck by the gentle wisdom in his response, the way he honored both Tommy's excitement and the historical significance of the find. It was another glimpse into the kind of man Marcus was: thoughtful, respectful, aware of his place. In a larger story, as they reached the porch, Tommy suddenly turned to Elena with hopeful eyes. "Would you like to stay for dinner? Uncle Mac makes really good stew, and we have cornbread from Mrs. Chun at the church." Elena glanced at Marcus, not wanting to impose but also reluctant to return to the cabin's solitude just yet. The afternoon with Tommy had reminded her how much she'd missed teaching, and the conversation with Marcus had offered a glimpse of understanding she hadn't expected to find. "You're welcome to join us," Marcus said warmly. "It's nothing fancy, but there's plenty." "I'd like that," Elena said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Thank you." Part 3. Hesitant acceptance. The Sullivan kitchen was exactly what Elena would have expected: large, functional, and clearly designed for feeding hardworking people. A massive wooden table dominated the center of the room, scarred from years of use but polished to a warm shine. Cast iron pots hung from hooks near an old-fashioned wood-burning stove, and mason jars filled with preserved vegetables lined open shelves along one wall. Tommy immediately claimed the task of setting the table, handling the heavy ceramic plates with careful precision. Elena found herself automatically helping, folding napkins and filling water glasses while Marcus stirred the pot of stew. The domestic routine felt both foreign and familiar. Foreign because she'd been alone for so long. Familiar because it awakened memories of the home she'd once imagined building. "Tommy tells me you're quite the storyteller," Marcus said as he ladled stew into bowls. "Something about making reading fun instead of frustrating." She made the words stop jumping around. Tommy added seriously. "And she said my brain isn't broken, it just works different." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at the boy's earnest explanation. "That's exactly right. Different doesn't mean wrong. It just means we need to find the right approach." Marcus set a bowl in front of her, and Elena was immediately enveloped by the rich aroma of beef and vegetables. It smelled like comfort, like the kind of meal that could chase away both hunger and loneliness. "This smells incredible," she said. "Family recipe," Marcus replied, settling into his chair. "My grandfather's contribution to ranch life. He said a good stew could get you through anything: long winters, difficult times, stubborn cattle." Tommy giggled at this, clearly having heard the story many times before. "Tell her about the time great-grandpa Jake fed stew to the bull that got loose." "Oh, that's a tale," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling. Jake was about Tommy's age when their prize bull broke through 3 fences and ended up in his mother's garden. The bull was so angry about being chased that nobody could get near him. So Jake took a bowl of leftover stew and set it down near the garden gate. And the bull was so interested in the food that he forgot to be mad. Tommy continued, clearly knowing the story by heart. Great-grandpa Jake said it proved that food was the way to any creature's heart. Elena found herself smiling at the family legend, charmed by the way Tommy's eyes lit up during the telling. It spoke to the kind of oral tradition that bound families together across generations, the stories that became more important for their meaning than their accuracy. "Smart man, your great-grandfather," she said. "Did the trick work?" "According to family legend, that bull never caused trouble again," Marcus said. though I suspect there might have been some strategic fence repairs involved as well. As they ate, Elena learned more about the Sullivan family history. The ranch had been in Marcus's family for 4 generations, each adding their own improvements and facing their own challenges. His grandfather had survived the Great Depression by diversifying into vegetables and crafts. His father had modernized the operation but died young in a ranching accident, leaving Marcus's mother to raise him and his sister alone. She was remarkable, Marcus said when Elena asked about his mother. Kept the ranch running, raised 2 kids, and still found time to help neighbors when they needed it. She always said the land would provide if you treated it with respect. Where is she now? Elena asked gently. Died 6 years ago, Marcus replied without bitterness. Cancer. She got to meet Tommy as a baby, which meant everything to her. Said he had the Sullivan eyes and the Rodriguez stubborn streak. Rodriguez. Elena looked surprised. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. My mama was half Mexican. Grandma Sofia always made the best tamales for Christmas. Uncle Mac tries, but… He made a face that clearly indicated his uncle's efforts fell short. Hey now, Marcus protested with mock offense. My tamales are perfectly edible. Edible isn't the same as good, Tommy replied with the brutal honesty of childhood. Elena laughed despite herself, charmed by the easy affection between them. But she was also intrigued by the multicultural threads woven through their family story. So Tommy speaks Spanish? Some, the boy said proudly. Mama taught me before she died. Want to hear? Without waiting for an answer, Tommy launched into a rapid stream of Spanish, clearly reciting something he'd memorized. Elena recognized it as a children's prayer, beautifully pronounced despite his young age. That's wonderful, Tommy, she said warmly. Your pronunciation is excellent. Your mother taught you well. Marcus was watching this exchange with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. I've been worried he'd forget, he admitted quietly. I don't speak Spanish well enough to help him maintain it, and there aren't many opportunities to practice. Around here, Elena felt a familiar pang of recognition. Languages, like songs, could be lost without regular use. Maybe I could help with that too, she offered before she could stop herself. I speak Spanish fluently. Tommy's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? You could talk to me in Spanish and I could practice? If your uncle thinks it's a good idea, Elena said, glancing at Marcus for permission. I think it would be wonderful, Marcus said, his gratitude evident. Carmen, Tommy's mother, always said she wanted him to stay connected to both sides of his heritage. I just haven't known how to honor that. As the meal continued, Elena found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. The conversation flowed naturally between practical ranch matters, Tommy's school activities, and gentle questions about her own background that never felt invasive. Marcus had a gift for making people feel heard without making them feel pressured to reveal more than they were comfortable sharing. Elena, Tommy said suddenly, pausing with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Why were you sitting by the creek this morning? Were you sad? The direct question caught both adults off guard. Marcus started to gently redirect his nephew, but Elena held up a hand to indicate it was okay. I was thinking, she said carefully. Sometimes when people have been traveling for a long time, they need quiet places to think about what comes next. Tommy considered this with his usual gravity. Are you thinking about staying here? Elena felt the weight of both their gazes on her. It was the question she'd been avoiding asking herself, the one that required her to admit she was tired of running, tired of never belonging anywhere or to anyone. I'm thinking about a lot of things, she said finally. Change is difficult for everyone, but it's also how we grow. It wasn't really an answer, but Tommy seemed satisfied with it. Marcus, however, continued to watch her with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than she was ready to reveal. After dinner, Tommy disappeared upstairs to work on an art project, leaving Elena and Marcus to handle the dishes. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Elena washing while Marcus dried and put away. The routine felt natural, as if they'd been sharing kitchen duties for years instead of hours. He likes you, Marcus said eventually, hanging up the dish towel. Tommy doesn't warm up to people easily anymore. Since his parents died, he's been cautious about getting attached. Elena understood that caution intimately. He's protecting himself. It's smart, actually, even if it's heartbreaking. You sound like you know something about that kind of protection, Marcus observed gently. Elena paused in wiping down the table, considering how much to reveal. There was something about Marcus that invited honesty. Maybe it was his own obvious struggles, or the way he didn't push for information she wasn't ready to give. When you've been hurt badly enough, she said finally, trusting again feels like volunteering for more pain. Even when you know the alternative is loneliness. Marcus nodded slowly. The walls that keep pain out also keep joy out. Exactly. Elena was surprised by his understanding. But sometimes those walls are all that keep you standing. True. Marcus agreed. But sometimes you meet people who make you wonder if standing alone is really worth it. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena felt her pulse quicken at the suggestion that he might be talking about more than general philosophy. But before she could respond, Tommy's voice called down from upstairs. Uncle Mac, the bathroom faucet is making that funny noise again. Marcus sighed and headed toward the stairs. I'll be right back. That faucet has been threatening to give up entirely for weeks. Alone in the kitchen, Elena found herself studying the details of the Sullivan home more carefully. Children's artwork decorated the refrigerator, held by magnets shaped like farm animals. A shelf near the window held a collection of rocks and feathers that clearly represented Tommy's nature discoveries. Family photographs clustered on a small table by the door. Marcus in military uniform, a beautiful woman who must have been Tommy's mother, generations of Sullivans standing proudly before the ranch buildings. It was a home built on love and history, where every object told a story of the people who'd lived and laughed and grieved within these walls. Elena felt a sharp pang of longing for the kind of roots she'd never had, even before her life had fallen apart. The pictures tell quite a story, don't they? Marcus's voice came from behind her as he returned from his plumbing mission. Elena realized she'd been staring at a photo of what looked like a family reunion, with dozens of people arranged on the front porch of the house. Such a large family, she said wistfully. Marcus corrected gently. Time and distance have scattered most of them. Tommy and I are pretty much what's left of the Sullivan clan, at least in Colorado. That must be lonely, Elena said, then immediately regretted the observation. She didn't want to highlight his isolation when he'd been nothing but kind to her. But Marcus didn't seem offended. It can be, he admitted. Especially when Tommy asks questions about family traditions I only half remember, or when he needs the kind of guidance I'm not sure I'm qualified to give. Like what? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Elena was beginning to recognize as his response to feeling overwhelmed. Last week he asked me what it means to be a good man. How do you answer something like that? I'm still figuring it out myself. Elena felt her heart contract at his honesty. Here was a man struggling with questions that had no easy answers, trying to raise a boy without a roadmap for success. What did you tell him? That good men take care of the people they love, keep their promises, and try to leave places better than they found them, Marcus said. But I worry it's not enough. He needs more examples than just me. From what I've seen today, Elena said carefully, you're providing an excellent example. Tommy is kind, thoughtful, and secure in your love. Those are the foundations of good character. Marcus's expression suggested he found it difficult to believe such praise. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. The ranch is struggling, Tommy's having problems at school, and I'm one crisis away from losing everything my family spent generations building. The weight of his responsibilities was evident in every line of his face. Elena found herself wanting to offer comfort, to ease the burden he carried so stoically. You don't have to carry it all alone, she said quietly. Don't I? Marcus asked with a bitter laugh. There's nobody else left to carry it. If I fail, Tommy loses the only home he's ever known. The last piece of Sullivan legacy disappears. Elena heard the fear beneath his words, the terror of a man who'd already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose more. It was a feeling she understood intimately, though her losses had been different in nature. What if you don't fail, she asked gently. What if there are solutions you haven't considered yet, people willing to help if you let them? Marcus looked at her sharply, as if trying to determine whether she was speaking hypothetically or making an offer. People don't usually volunteer to take on other people's problems, he said carefully. Maybe not strangers, Elena agreed, but friends might. And sometimes strangers become friends faster than anyone expects. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. She'd spent 2 years avoiding exactly this kind of connection, This investment in other people's lives that made walking away increasingly difficult. But something about Marcus and Tommy had slipped past her defenses, making her want to help despite the risks to her own emotional safety. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice low and serious. "I don't want you to feel obligated to solve our problems. You're dealing with your own situation, and we barely know each other." "That's true," Elena acknowledged. "But sometimes the best help comes from people who aren't too close to the problem to see clearly. Fresh eyes, different perspectives." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with pride and practicality. "What kind of solutions are you thinking about?" he asked finally. Elena felt a flutter of excitement as ideas began forming. "Well, this is beautiful land in a tourist area. Have you considered diversifying beyond cattle? Agritourism, maybe, or educational programs for city families who want their children to experience ranch life?" "I've thought about it," Marcus admitted. "But I don't have the capital for the kind of improvements that would attract paying guests. And I wouldn't know how to market something like that." "But I might," Elena said, the words coming out before she'd fully considered their implications. "Before I taught elementary school, I worked in hospitality marketing in Denver. I helped several rural businesses develop tourism programs." Marcus stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "You'd consider helping with something like that?" Elena felt her heart racing as she realized how deeply she was committing herself to their future. "I'd consider exploring the possibilities," she said carefully. "No promises, but maybe we could look at what options exist." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was worth every alarm bell going off in her head about getting too involved. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw the man he must have been before grief and responsibility had worn him down. Younger, more optimistic, full of plans and dreams. "Thank you," he said simply. "Even if nothing comes of it, thank you for being willing to look." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak past the emotion lodged in her throat. She'd just volunteered to help save the ranch that was Tommy's only home, which meant she was already more invested in their future than was wise for someone who supposedly was just passing through. But as she looked around the kitchen with its family photographs and evidence of love in every corner, Elena realized she might be ready to stop running after all. Part 4. Trust Foundation. Building the next few days fell into a rhythm that surprised Elena with its naturalness. Each morning, she would wake in the cabin to the sound of Marcus starting his day, the distant lowing of cattle, the rumble of his truck engine, the cheerful barking of the ranch dogs. She'd find coffee waiting for her on the cabin's porch, left there sometime during Marcus's early rounds, along with whatever baked goods the generous women of Copper Ridge had sent for that poor man raising a boy alone. Tommy arrived each afternoon with his schoolwork and stayed until supper time, transforming the quiet cabin into a bustling center of learning. Elena discovered that his struggles with traditional reading methods masked a brilliant, curious mind that absorbed information like a sponge once it was presented in ways that worked for him. They developed a system of breaking complex paragraphs into manageable chunks, using different colored pencils to highlight key information, and incorporating movement breaks when his attention began to wander. "You're like a reading detective," Tommy announced one afternoon as they worked through a particularly challenging science passage about the water cycle. "You figure out all the clues about how my brain works best." Elena laughed at the comparison, but it wasn't inaccurate. Each child she'd taught had been a puzzle to solve, a unique combination of learning styles and interests that required creativity and patience to unlock. With Tommy, she was rediscovering the joy of watching comprehension dawn on a young face, the satisfaction of helping someone discover their own intelligence. "Speaking of detectives," she said, setting aside his science homework, "I've been thinking about your uncle's ranch situation. Would you like to help me investigate some possibilities?" Tommy's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of investigating?" "Well, I noticed that a lot of cars drive slowly past your gate, especially on weekends. Have you ever wondered why?" Tommy considered this seriously. "Uncle Max says city people like to look at the mountains and the cattle. He waves at them sometimes." "Exactly. Those are tourists, people who pay money to experience things they can't find in the city. What if there was a way for your ranch to give them experiences they'd pay for?" The boy's forehead wrinkled in concentration. "Like what?" Elena pulled out a notebook she'd been using to jot down ideas. "Like learning to ride horses or helping with cattle drives. or staying overnight in a real bunkhouse. City families pay hundreds of dollars for that kind of authentic ranch experience. Really? Tommy's voice was filled with wonder. People would pay money to do chores? When it's not your regular life, chores become adventures, Elena explained. Think about it. When you help your uncle with the cattle, how do you feel? Important, Tommy said immediately. Like I'm really helping with something that matters. Exactly. City children don't often get to feel that way. Their parents would love to give them that experience. Tommy was clearly intrigued by this new perspective on ranch life. Could we have kids come stay and learn to take care of animals? Possibly. But first we need to research what other ranches are doing, what licenses might be required, and how much it would cost to get started. Elena showed him the notebook where she'd been sketching initial ideas. Want to be my research partner? For the next hour, they worked together on what Elena privately called Project Ranch Rescue. Tommy proved to have an intuitive understanding of what aspects of ranch life would appeal to visitors: the baby animals in spring, the drama of cattle drives, the satisfaction of a hard day's work rewarded with a hearty meal under the stars. We could teach them to milk cows, Tommy suggested eagerly, and show them how to collect eggs without making the chickens mad. And Uncle Mac knows all the best fishing spots. Elena wrote down each suggestion, impressed by the boy's natural marketing instincts. He understood instinctively that the appeal lay not in luxury accommodations, but in authentic experiences that connected people to the land and to each other. Their planning session was interrupted by the sound of a truck pulling up outside the cabin. Through the window, Elena saw Marcus climbing out of his pickup, his clothes dusty from the day's work. Tommy immediately ran to the door to greet his uncle, chattering excitedly about their afternoon project. Miss Elena thinks people would pay money to do ranch work, Tommy announced breathlessly. And we're going to research how to make it happen. I'm her partner. Marcus's eyebrows rose as he looked at Elena over his nephew's head. Research? Elena felt suddenly self-conscious about her presumption in making plans for his property. I hope you don't mind. I mentioned the agritourism idea, and Tommy was interested in exploring the concept. We were just brainstorming. Show him the notebook, Tommy urged. Show him all our ideas. Elena reluctantly handed over her notes, watching Marcus's face as he read through their preliminary thoughts. His expression remained carefully neutral, and she began to worry that she'd overstepped by involving Tommy in planning for a future that wasn't hers to determine. These are thoughtful ideas, Marcus said finally, his tone giving nothing away. You've clearly put considerable effort into thinking through the possibilities. Too much effort, probably, Elena said quickly. I'm sorry if we've been presumptuous. This is your ranch, your decision. Marcus looked up from the notebook, his expression softening. Elena, I asked for your perspective. The fact that you're taking it seriously enough to do actual research means more than you know. But Elena sensed there was more coming. Marcus glanced at Tommy, who was listening intently to the adult conversation. But I need to understand what level of involvement you're considering. These kinds of changes would take months to implement properly, maybe years. Are you thinking about this as a consulting project, or? He trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish the question. Elena felt her chest tighten as she realized the implications of what she'd been planning. She'd been thinking like someone who would be around to see the project through, someone invested in the long-term success of the ranch. But she hadn't consciously decided to stay long-term. It had just been an assumption she'd been operating under without examining. I don't know, she said honestly. I haven't thought that far ahead. Tommy's face fell slightly, and Elena felt a pang of guilt for the uncertainty in her voice. The boy had already experienced too much instability in his short life. She shouldn't add to it by making plans she might not be around to fulfill. Maybe we should take things one step at a time, Marcus suggested gently. No need to make long-term commitments before we understand what we're dealing with. It was a reasonable suggestion, but Elena heard the careful distance in his voice and knew he was protecting himself as much as his nephew. She'd seen the hope in his eyes when she'd first mentioned helping, and now she was pulling back from the level of involvement that hope had implied. You're right, she agreed, though the words felt hollow. One step at a time. Tommy looked between the adults, clearly sensing the shift in energy even if he didn't understand its cause. Are we still research partners? He asked Elena uncertainly. Of course, Elena assured him, forcing brightness into her voice. Research doesn't require long-term commitments. We can explore possibilities without making promises about implementation. The boy seemed satisfied with this answer, but Elena caught the look of disappointment that flickered across Marcus's features before he masked it with polite agreement. She'd managed to maintain her emotional distance, but at the cost of hurting someone who'd shown her nothing but kindness. That evening, after Tommy had returned to the main house for dinner, Elena sat on her cabin porch watching the sun set. Behind the mountains, the beauty of the landscape seemed to mock her internal turmoil. She'd found exactly what she'd been unconsciously searching for during 2 years of wandering. A place where she was needed, people who valued her contributions, the possibility of building something meaningful. And she was sabotaging it because the prospect of committing, of truly belonging somewhere again, terrified her more than continued loneliness. A soft knock on her cabin door interrupted Elena's brooding. She opened it to find Marcus standing on her porch, holding 2 steaming mugs and wearing an expression of quiet determination. "Thought you might like some hot chocolate," he said simply. "Tommy's recipe, he insists it's better than anything adults make." Elena stepped aside to let him in, grateful for the interruption to her circular thoughts. Marcus handed her one of the mugs and settled into the single chair while she perched on the edge of the bed, the small cabin forcing an intimacy that felt both comfortable and charged with unspoken tension. "This is delicious," Elena said after taking a sip. The chocolate was rich and warming, with a hint of cinnamon that spoke of careful preparation. "Tommy takes his hot chocolate very seriously," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "He learned the recipe from his mother, and he's appointed himself guardian of the family tradition." They sat in silence for a moment, both seemingly focused on their drinks while navigating the awkwardness left by their earlier conversation. Finally, Marcus set down his mug and looked at Elena directly. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "This afternoon, when you were talking about the ranch ideas with Tommy, I made you feel pressured about staying long-term. That wasn't fair." Elena shook her head. "You didn't pressure me. If anything, I was the one making assumptions about involvement I hadn't thought through properly." "Maybe we both were," Marcus acknowledged. "But here's the thing, Elena. You've been here less than a week, and already you've made a difference in Tommy's life that I couldn't achieve in 3 years of trying. You've given him confidence in his abilities, helped him see his learning differences as strengths rather than deficits. Whatever your plans are, whatever brought you here, I'm grateful for the time you've given us." The sincerity in his voice made Elena's throat tighten with emotion. "He's a remarkable boy, Marcus. Any progress he's made comes from his own intelligence and determination, guided by someone who knew how to unlock it," Marcus countered. "Don't diminish your contribution. You have a gift for teaching, for seeing what children need and providing it." Elena found herself studying Marcus's face in the lamplight, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of constant responsibility. "You're doing an incredible job with him," she said softly. "Single parenting is difficult under the best circumstances, but raising a traumatized child while managing a struggling ranch, I don't know how you do it." Marcus's laugh was self-deprecating. "Most days I'm not sure I am doing it. I just keep moving forward and hope that love is enough to cover the mistakes." "Love is the foundation everything else builds on," Elena replied, echoing words she'd spoken to him before. "Tommy knows he's loved, Marcus. That security is what allows him to trust new people, to take risks in learning, to believe in his own worth." "You really think so?" There was vulnerability in the question, the uncertainty of a man who'd been questioning his adequacy as a parent. "I know so," Elena said firmly. "I've worked with hundreds of children over the years. The ones who thrive, regardless of their circumstances, are the ones who know they're unconditionally loved. Tommy has that foundation." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing her reassurance. "It helps to hear that from someone with your experience," he said finally. "Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to know if you're succeeding or just surviving." Elena understood that feeling intimately. Her own life had felt like pure survival mode for so long that she'd forgotten what it meant to truly live rather than simply endure. "Maybe that's enough sometimes," she said thoughtfully. "Getting through the hard parts so you can reach the better ones. Is that what you're doing?" Marcus asked gently. "Getting through the hard parts?" Elena met his gaze, seeing genuine concern rather than idle curiosity. There was something about Marcus that invited honesty, that made her want to lower the walls she'd maintained so carefully. I've been running for 2 years, she said quietly. From a situation that went very wrong, from the person I used to be, from expectations I couldn't meet anymore. I thought if I kept moving, eventually I'd find a place where the past couldn't follow. And has it worked? Elena smiled ruefully. Running is exhausting and lonely, and no matter how far you go, you still wake up with yourself every morning. Marcus nodded with the understanding of someone who'd fought his own battles with inner demons. After I came back from Afghanistan, I tried to outwork the memories. 16-hour days, projects that pushed my body to its limits, anything to avoid sitting still long enough for the ghosts to catch up. It took Margaret to make me understand that healing isn't about escape, it's about integration. Integration. Learning to carry the hard parts without letting them define you, Marcus explained. Margaret used to say that scars are proof. You survived something that could have destroyed you. They're evidence of strength, not weakness. Elena touched her throat unconsciously, thinking of the invisible scars she carried from her last performance, from the betrayal that had shattered her trust in people and institutions she believed in. Some scars feel more like evidence of failure, she said quietly. Only if you let them, Marcus replied. Elena, I don't know what happened to you before you came here, and I won't ask for details you're not ready to share. But I know that whatever brought you to that creek bank, singing alone in the wilderness, it led you to us. And that feels like the opposite of failure to me. His words hit her with unexpected force, reframing her story in a way she'd never considered. She'd seen her flight from Denver as the ultimate defeat, the final collapse of everything she'd worked to build. But what if it had actually been a journey toward something better, toward people who needed what she had to offer? I used to perform professionally, she heard herself saying, the words emerging without her conscious decision to share them. Opera mostly. Small companies, nothing glamorous, but it was my life, my identity. And then someone I trusted violated that trust in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and my judgment. Marcus's expression darkened, and Elena suspected he was reading between the lines of her careful phrasing. You stopped performing because of what this person did? I couldn't, Elena said simply. Every time I tried to get on stage, I'd freeze. All those eyes watching me, judging me, waiting for me to be vulnerable. It felt impossible. So I walked away from everything I'd built, from contracts and colleagues, and the only career I'd ever wanted, and started running. Elena confirmed. City to city, job to job, never staying long enough to matter or be mattered to. I told myself I was protecting myself, but really I was just postponing the decision about what comes next. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. What do you think comes next? Elena looked around the small cabin that had become a temporary haven, thinking about Tommy's eager face as they worked through his homework, about the research they'd begun for ranch improvements, about the sense of purpose she'd rediscovered in teaching. I don't know, she said honestly. For the first time in 2 years, I'm not running towards something or away from something. I'm just here. And it's terrifying and wonderful and confusing all at the same time. Sounds like the definition of being alive instead of just surviving, Marcus observed with a gentle smile. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained over her emotions and expectations. Maybe it is, she agreed. Though I'm not sure I remember how to do that. None of us do at first, Marcus said. That's why we need people to practice with, safe places to make mistakes while we figure it out. The implication hung between them, an offer of safety and acceptance that Elena felt in her bones. Here was a man who understood what it meant to rebuild after devastating loss, who knew that healing was a process rather than an event. And he was offering her the space and time to find her way back to herself. Marcus, she began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. You don't have to decide anything tonight, he said gently, correctly interpreting her hesitation. About the ranch ideas, about staying, about anything. But I want you to know that whatever you're ready for, we're here. Tommy and I, we're not going anywhere. The simple promise of stability, of people who wouldn't disappear if she made the wrong choice or needed time to work through her fears, was more precious than he could know. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back, not ready for that level of vulnerability. Thank you, she said quietly. For the hot chocolate, for the conversation, for understanding that sometimes people need time to figure things out. Marcus stood, collecting both mugs with careful efficiency. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But Elena, when you're ready to stop running, I hope you'll consider that the place you're looking for might be right here." After he left, Elena sat in the quiet cabin feeling more unsettled than she had in days. Marcus's gentle acceptance of her fears and uncertainty had somehow made her more aware of them, not less. She'd grown accustomed to the constant motion of running, to the simplicity of decisions made purely for survival. Now she was being offered the chance to choose based on what she wanted rather than what she was fleeing from, and the prospect was overwhelming. She stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cool mountain air and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were settling for the night with low, contented sounds. Closer by, she could hear the gentle whinny of horses in the pasture and the rustle of wind through the pine trees. It was a symphony of peace, of life continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human turmoil. Elena thought about Tommy's eager face as he'd shared their research ideas, about Marcus's quiet strength as he carried responsibilities that would have crushed a lesser man, about the way both of them had welcomed her into their lives without demands or expectations. For the first time in years, she was somewhere she was genuinely needed, where her skills and experience could make a real difference in people's lives. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the ranch. Elena was working with Tommy on a math worksheet when the sound of multiple vehicles approaching caught their attention. Through the cabin window, they could see a small convoy pulling up to the main house, a sleek black SUV followed by a pickup truck and a sedan with government plates. "Who do you think that is?" Tommy asked, his voice tight with the anxiety that always accompanied unexpected arrivals. Elena felt her own tension spike, old fears about pursuit and discovery flooding back despite the legal resolution of her situation. "I don't know," she said, trying to keep her voice calm for Tommy's sake. "But let's go see if your uncle needs anything." They walked toward the main house together, Elena's protective instincts making her stay close to Tommy. As they approached, she could see Marcus standing on the porch talking to three people in business attire, two men and a woman, all carrying folders and wearing the kind of expressions that suggested official business. "Mr. Sullivan," one of the men was saying as Elena and Tommy came within earshot, "we represent the Pinnacle Development Corporation. We're here to make you an offer for your property that I think you'll find very generous." Elena felt Tommy go tense beside her. These were the developers Marcus had mentioned, the ones who'd been circling the ranch like vultures waiting for financial desperation to force a sale. Their timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone had told them about the ranch's struggles. "Gentlemen, Miss Hartley," Marcus replied with careful politeness, "I appreciate your interest, but as I've told your representatives before, the ranch isn't for sale." The woman, Miss Hartley, stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand your attachment to this land. Family heritage is important, but we're prepared to offer significantly more than current market value, enough for you to purchase comparable property elsewhere and have substantial funds left over for your nephew's education." Elena noticed how they'd done their homework, knowing about Tommy and using his future as leverage. It was a calculated move designed to exploit Marcus's love for his nephew and his concerns about providing adequately for the boy's needs. "The offer is $2.5 million, one of the men added, opening his folder to reveal official-looking documents. "Cash sale, closing within 30 days. You'd never have to worry about mortgage payments or property taxes again." Elena saw Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. It was clearly a substantial sum, probably more than the ranch could realistically be worth on the open market, which meant these developers had specific plans that would generate significant profits from the land. "What exactly are you planning to do with the property?" Marcus asked, his tone carefully neutral. Miss Hartley's smile widened. "Pinnacle specializes in luxury resort communities for discerning clients. We envision a world-class destination resort with a championship golf course, spa facilities, and exclusive residential properties. The natural beauty of this location is perfect for our vision." Elena felt sick imagining this peaceful valley, transformed into manicured lawns and artificial water features, the wildlife displaced, and the open spaces carved up into development lots. It would be the complete destruction of everything that made this place special. "I see," Marcus said quietly. And I assume you've done environmental impact studies, considered the effects on local wildlife migration patterns, consulted with the community about infrastructure needs? The developers exchanged glances, clearly not expecting detailed questions about their plans. Of course, we'll handle all necessary permits and studies, Ms. Hartley said smoothly. Pinnacle has extensive experience with environmental compliance. I'm sure you do, Marcus replied, his tone suggesting he had doubts about their definition of compliance. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to visit, but my answer remains the same. The ranch is not for sale. The lead developer's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Sullivan, I hope you'll take some time to consider our offer seriously. Properties of this size and debt load don't often have buyers willing to pay premium prices. This might be your best opportunity to resolve your financial difficulties. Elena felt a chill at the implied threat. These people had clearly researched the ranch's financial situation thoroughly, and they were essentially suggesting that Marcus might not have other options if things got worse. Uncle Mac? Tommy's voice was small but determined as he stepped forward. What are they talking about? Are we going to lose the ranch? The developers looked uncomfortable at the child's direct question, but Marcus knelt down to Tommy's level with the patience Elena had come to admire. Tommy, these people want to buy our land so they can build a resort. But this is our home, and I'm not interested in selling it. Even for a lot of money. Tommy asked, clearly trying to understand the adult complexities at play. Even for a lot of money, Marcus confirmed. Some things are more important than money, son. Like keeping the promises we make to the people we love. Elena felt her heart clench at his words, understanding that he was referring to the promise he'd made to his sister to provide Tommy with stability and the promise to his family legacy to preserve the land they'd worked for generations. Ms. Hartley apparently decided to try a different approach. Mr. Sullivan, think about your nephew's future. With our offer, you could afford to send him to the finest schools, provide opportunities that simply aren't available in rural areas. Don't let sentimentality prevent you from giving him the best possible start in life. Elena saw red at the woman's manipulation, using Tommy's welfare to pressure Marcus into a decision that would benefit only the developers. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. Actually, she said clearly, research shows that children who grow up in rural environments with strong family connections and community ties have significant advantages in terms of emotional development, problem-solving skills, and environmental awareness. Tommy is receiving an excellent education right here, both academically and in terms of character development. The developers turned to look at her with obvious surprise, clearly not expecting intervention from someone they probably assumed was hired help. Miss Hartley's expression sharpened as she took in Elena's confident bearing and articulate speech. "And you are?" she asked with cool politeness. "Elena Rodriguez." Elena replied, making a split-second decision to claim her connection to this place and these people. "I'm working with the Sullivans on developing sustainable agritourism opportunities. For the ranch, we believe there are viable alternatives to selling the land for development." It wasn't entirely true. They'd only begun exploring possibilities, but Elena felt a fierce protectiveness toward this place and the people she'd come to care about. She wasn't going to stand by and watch predatory developers manipulate Marcus through his love for Tommy. Marcus shot her a look of surprise and gratitude, while Tommy beamed with pride at hearing their research project described so officially. The developers, meanwhile, looked distinctly less pleased with this development. Agritourism, one of the men said dismissively. "That's a nice hobby, but it's hardly a sustainable business model for a property of this size. Mr. Sullivan, you're dealing with serious financial pressures that require serious solutions." Actually, Elena continued, drawing on her years of hospitality marketing experience. Agritourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry with consistent year-over-year growth. Families are increasingly seeking authentic experiences that connect them with nature and agriculture. A ranch of this size and beauty, with proper marketing and infrastructure development, could generate substantial revenue while preserving the land's natural character. She was winging it somewhat, but her confidence seemed to give the developers pause. Ms. Hartley studied Elena more carefully, clearly reassessing the situation. "Ms. Rodriguez, even if such a venture could eventually become profitable, the startup costs and timeline for development would be significant. Mr. Sullivan needs immediate solutions, not long-term possibilities. Elena felt Marcus's gaze on her, and she made another impulsive decision that would commit her far more deeply than she'd intended. Which is why I'm prepared to provide the initial investment and expertise needed to develop the agritourism program. Mr. Sullivan won't need to take on additional debt or risk the ranch's security. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Elena had just committed to financing and developing a business plan she'd only begun to conceptualize on a ranch owned by people she'd known for less than a week. It was the kind of impulsive decision she'd spent years avoiding, the kind of financial and emotional investment that could lead to devastating loss. But looking at Tommy's hopeful face and Marcus's shocked gratitude, Elena realized she was tired of making decisions based on fear. These people had offered her belonging and acceptance when she needed it most. Now they needed her support, and she was finally ready to give it. The developers clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. Miss Hartley's polished composure slipped slightly as she realized their carefully planned pressure campaign had been derailed by an unknown variable. "Well," she said stiffly, "that's certainly unexpected. Mr. Sullivan, I hope you'll still consider our offer carefully. Business partnerships with friends can become complicated when financial pressures mount." The subtle emphasis on friends was designed to suggest that Elena's offer was too good to be true, that emotional decisions led to financial disaster. But Marcus straightened to his full imposing height, his expression cooling noticeably. "Miss Hartley, I appreciate your concern, but I'm confident in my ability to evaluate business opportunities. Your offer is noted, but my position remains unchanged. The ranch is not for sale, now or in the future." The finality in his tone seemed to penetrate even the developer's persistent optimism. They exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that their carefully planned approach had failed spectacularly. "Of course," Miss Hartley said, recovering her professional demeanor. "If circumstances change, you have our contact information. Pinnacle's offer will remain open for the next 60 days. As the convoy of vehicles disappeared down the ranch road, Elena felt the full weight of what she'd just committed to settling on her shoulders. She'd essentially pledged to finance a business venture she knew little about, with people she'd known for days, in a place she hadn't decided to stay permanently. It was either the worst decision she'd ever made or the first truly brave one. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, "what you just did. I can't let you risk your financial security for our problems." "You're not letting me do anything," Elena replied firmly. "I made a choice, and it wasn't entirely altruistic. I believe this could work, Marcus. The ranch has everything needed for a successful agritourism operation. Beautiful location, authentic ranch activities, a family story that would appeal to guests. With the right development and marketing, it could be very profitable." Tommy was practically vibrating with excitement. "Does this mean we're really going to have families come stay at the ranch? And I can teach them about the animals?" Elena looked down at his eager face and felt a surge of determination. Whatever risks she was taking, they were worth it to preserve this child's security and give him the chance to grow up in the place he loved. "Yes, Tommy," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We're going to make this ranch the most successful family destination in Colorado." Marcus was still looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper, more complicated. "Elena, are you sure about this? It's a huge commitment, and we barely know each other." Elena met his gaze directly, feeling the truth of her next words in her bones. "Maybe we don't know each other's histories very well yet," she said quietly. "But I know what kind of people you are. I know Tommy is worth investing in, and I know this land is worth preserving. Sometimes the heart recognizes home before the mind catches up." The admission hung between them, more revealing than any detailed confession about her past could have been. Elena had just acknowledged that this place, these people, had become home to her in a way she'd never expected. And she was finally ready to fight for home instead of running from it. Part 4. Trust Foundation Building, final 3 months later. Elena stood in the ranch's main yard watching the first official guests of Sullivan Family Ranch Adventures unload their luggage from a dusty minivan. The Morrison family from Denver had booked a 4-day authentic ranch experience, and Elena felt a mixture of excitement and terror as she watched 8-year-old Jessica Morrison's eyes widen at the sight of the mountains surrounding their temporary home. The transformation of the ranch had been remarkable, fueled by Elena's inheritance money and an intense collaborative effort between herself, Marcus, and surprisingly, half the town of Copper Ridge. Word of their plans had spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and offers of help had poured in from unexpected sources. Pastor David Chun had connected them with a contractor who specialized in rustic renovations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had provided contacts for liability insurance and health regulations. Even Sheriff Henderson had helped them navigate the permitting process with the county. The old bunkhouse had been converted into comfortable guest accommodations, with rustic furniture crafted by local artisans and modern amenities carefully integrated to maintain authenticity. Elena had insisted on preserving the building's character, while ensuring guest comfort. No luxury resort amenities, but clean linens, hot showers, and genuine Western hospitality. "Welcome to Sullivan Family Ranch," Marcus called out as he approached the Morrison family, his massive frame somehow managing to project warmth rather than intimidation. Over the past months, Elena had watched him transform from a man barely keeping his head above water to someone genuinely excited about sharing his family's heritage with others. Tommy bounded up beside his uncle, wearing the junior ranch hand badge Elena had designed for him. His confidence had blossomed along with his reading skills, and he'd become their secret weapon for connecting with visiting children who were initially intimidated by the rural environment. "I'm Tommy," he announced to Jessica Morrison with the self-assurance of someone who knew exactly what his role was. "I'm 8 too, and I know everything about the animals. Want to meet the horses first, or would you rather see the baby calves?" Elena smiled as she watched Jessica's shyness melt away under Tommy's enthusiastic welcome. This was exactly what she'd envisioned when they developed their program. Authentic connections between ranch life and urban families seeking real experiences. "Elena," Marcus called, gesturing for her to join the welcome process. "I'd like you to meet the Morrison family. This is Elena Rodriguez, our program director and the mastermind behind everything you'll be experiencing this week." Elena stepped forward, automatically shifting into the professional mode she'd perfected during her years in hospitality marketing. But this felt different from her previous work, more personal, more meaningful. These weren't just customers. They were people she was inviting to share something precious. "We're so excited to have you here," she said warmly, shaking hands with David and Patricia Morrison while their daughter Jessica hung back behind her parents. "I hope you're ready for 4 days of authentic ranch life, because Tommy and Marcus don't believe in going easy on our guests." "Are we really going to ride horses?" Jessica asked, peering around her mother with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Absolutely," Elena assured her. "We have some very gentle horses who love meeting new friends. But first, let's get you settled in the bunkhouse, and then Marcus can give you the grand tour." As they walked toward the renovated bunkhouse, Elena felt a deep satisfaction at how seamlessly their operation was running. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of planning, construction, marketing, and preparation, but every challenge had brought her and Marcus closer together as business partners in something more undefined but increasingly important. The breakthrough had come 6 weeks ago during a particularly stressful day when the county inspector had found several code violations that threatened to delay their opening. Elena had been on the phone with contractors while Marcus dealt with anxious horses who'd been spooked by the construction noise, and Tommy had been trying to help everyone while obviously overwhelmed by the adult stress surrounding him. In the middle of the chaos, Elena had found herself humming absently, the same Spanish lullaby she'd been singing by the creek the day Marcus first found her. Gradually, the melody had worked its magic. The horses had calmed, Tommy had relaxed, and even the gruff county inspector had paused in his note-taking to listen. "That's beautiful," Marcus had said quietly when she'd finished, his eyes holding an expression that made her heart skip. "I'd forgotten how much I missed hearing music in this house." It was then that Elena had realized she'd stopped thinking of herself as a temporary resident, somewhere between teaching Tommy to read with confidence and helping Marcus navigate small business regulations. She'd become part of the Sullivan family story. And more importantly, she'd wanted to be part of it. Now, watching the Morrison family settle into accommodations she'd helped design and plan activities she'd researched and developed, Elena felt a pride of ownership that went far beyond financial investment. This was her project, her vision made reality, her contribution to preserving something important. "Elena," Patricia Morrison said as they finished the bunkhouse tour, This is exactly what we were hoping for. Authentic but comfortable, educational but fun. How did you know to get the balance just right? Elena glanced at Marcus, who was listening with obvious pride in her accomplishment. I spent a lot of time thinking about what families really want from a ranch experience, she said. Not a dude ranch with choreographed activities, but real participation in ranch life. Marcus and Tommy taught me that the magic is in the authentic work, the connection to the land and animals. That evening, after the Morrison family had been treated to their first chuck wagon dinner and campfire storytelling session, Elena found herself alone with Marcus on the porch of the main house. Tommy had finally exhausted himself entertaining Jessica and her parents and had fallen asleep sprawled across Marcus's lap during the final ghost story. I think today was a success, Marcus said quietly, careful not to wake his nephew. The Morrison seemed genuinely engaged, not just politely tolerant. Elena nodded, feeling the satisfaction of a plan well executed. David Morrison told me this afternoon that it's the first vacation where Jessica hasn't asked for screen time once. She's completely absorbed in ranch life. Thanks to Tommy's enthusiasm and your program design, Marcus said. You've created something special here, Elena. Something that honors the ranch's heritage while ensuring its future. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his praise, but it was accompanied by a flutter of nervousness about the conversation she knew they needed to have. Their business partnership had been wildly successful, but the personal relationship underlying it remained carefully undefined despite growing attraction and deepening connection. Marcus, she began, then paused as she saw him gently lifting the sleeping Tommy. Let me help you get him to bed first. They worked together with the practiced efficiency of months of shared parenting, Elena holding doors while Marcus carried his nephew upstairs and then helping to remove shoes and tuck blankets around the exhausted boy. The domestic routine felt natural, like something they'd been doing for years rather than months. Back on the porch, they settled into the comfortable chairs Elena had purchased for guest relaxation areas. The night was clear and cool, with stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. In the distance, they could hear the gentle lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the aspen trees. Elena, Marcus said after a comfortable silence, I need to say something that's been on my mind for weeks. Elena's pulse quickened, sensing they were finally approaching the conversation that had been simmering beneath their successful collaboration. What is it? Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious in the starlight. When you first arrived here, you were running from something that hurt you badly. And I understand that healing takes time, that trust has to be rebuilt gradually. But watching you pour yourself into this ranch, into Tommy's education, into creating something meaningful, I need you to know that what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude or business partnership. Elena felt her breath catch at his honesty. She'd been sensing the same shift in their relationship, but hadn't been sure if it was wishful thinking or genuine mutual attraction. Marcus, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking for promises or commitments you're not ready to make. But I am asking if there's a possibility that this, he gestured between them and toward the ranch around them, could become something permanent. Not just the business arrangement, but the personal one too. Elena looked at this man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who'd given her space to heal while offering steady support, who'd trusted her with his family's legacy and his nephew's welfare. Marcus Sullivan represented everything she'd thought she'd lost the ability to believe in: integrity, genuine care, the possibility of love without manipulation or betrayal. Marcus, she said softly, I stopped running the day I decided to invest in this ranch. I just wasn't sure if you'd noticed. His smile in response was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and illuminating and full of promise. I was hoping, he admitted, but I wanted to give you time to be certain. Elena reached across the space between their chairs to take his hand, marveling at how right the simple contact felt. I'm certain, she said firmly. I'm certain that this is where I belong, that Tommy needs both of us, that what we're building together is worth fighting for. Marcus's fingers tightened around hers. Elena Rodriguez, are you saying you'd consider making this arrangement permanent, business and personal? I'm saying I can't imagine being anywhere else, Elena replied with growing confidence. This ranch, this family, this life we're creating, it's everything I never knew I was looking for. Marcus stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands settling gently on her waist. In that case, he said quietly. I have something I've been wanting to do for months. Elena's heart hammered as he leaned down, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she chose. Instead, she rose on her toes to meet him halfway, their first kiss gentle but filled with months of restrained longing and careful trust building. When they finally separated, Elena rested her forehead against Marcus's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat and feeling more at peace than she had in years. It's been 15 years since I heard a woman sing, Marcus said quietly, echoing his words from that first morning by the creek. And it's been even longer since I believed I deserved to be happy. Elena looked up at him, seeing vulnerability and hope warring in his expression. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Marcus Sullivan. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. Is that a proposal, Ms. Rodriguez? Marcus asked with gentle teasing, though his eyes were serious. Elena laughed, surprised by her own boldness. Maybe it is. Someone has to make the first move, and you've been patiently waiting for me to figure out what I wanted. Marcus's response was to kiss her again, more thoroughly this time, with the passion they'd both been carefully restraining. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like teenagers. Uncle Mac. Tommy's sleepy voice came from the doorway behind them. Is Elena staying forever now? Elena and Marcus turned to find the boy standing in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, but looking remarkably unsurprised by the scene he'd interrupted. In the months they'd been working together, Tommy had clearly been hoping for exactly this development. How long have you been awake? Marcus asked, settling a protective arm around Elena's shoulders. Since you carried me upstairs, Tommy admitted with a sheepish grin. But I really had to know if Elena was going to be my new mom, because that would be the best thing ever. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes at the boy's simple acceptance of her place in their family. Would you like that, Tommy? She asked, gently. If I became your mom. Tommy's answer was to launch himself at both of them, wrapping his arms around their waists in an enthusiastic hug. I've been wishing for it since the first day you helped me with reading, he mumbled into their embrace. You already feel like my mom. As they stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Colorado sky, Elena marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd come to this valley as a broken woman running from her past, and she was staying as someone who'd found her future. 6 months later, Elena Rodriguez became Elena Sullivan in a ceremony held in the ranch's main yard, with half of Copper Ridge in attendance and Tommy serving as both ring bearer and best man. Pastor Chin performed the service, incorporating elements of both Elena's Mexican heritage and Marcus's family traditions. The bride wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and the groom wore his grandfather's Western suit, carefully preserved through generations of Sullivan marriages. The wedding reception was held in the newly completed event barn, which had become a popular venue for local celebrations as well as guest activities. Elena's voice, strong and clear, filled the space as she sang the Spanish lullaby that had first drawn Marcus to her, followed by a duet with her new husband, a simple country song about love that endures through all seasons. As they danced, their first dance as husband and wife, Elena felt the weight of the silver star necklace Marcus had given her months earlier, now joined by her wedding ring as symbols of belonging and commitment. The woman who'd once believed her voice was broken forever was singing again, not for anonymous audiences, but for the people she loved most in the world. Any regrets? Marcus murmured as they swayed to the music, surrounded by friends and family, who'd become part of their extended ranch community. Elena looked around the barn at Tommy teaching the Morrison children, now regular guests, a line dance, at Sheriff Henderson sharing war stories with Marcus's army buddies, at Dr. Mitchell, and Pastor Chin debating ranch management techniques with visiting families. This was her world now, built on authenticity and connection rather than performance and approval. Not a single one, she said firmly, rising on her toes to kiss her husband as their wedding guests cheered around them. Though I do have one. Confession. What's that? Elena smiled mysteriously. I may have lied a little bit when I said I was just passing through. I think I was looking for home all along. I just didn't know what it would look like. Marcus's laugh was rich and joyful, the sound of a man who'd found his way back to happiness through love and partnership. Well then, he said, spinning her around the dance floor, welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan. Welcome home. As the celebration continued around them and the Colorado stars emerged overhead, Elena knew she'd finally found the place where her song belonged, not on distant stages for faceless crowds, but here, in this valley, with this family, building a legacy of love that would endure long after the music faded. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management, becoming known throughout Colorado as the premier family ranch experience. But more importantly, it remained a working ranch where 3 generations of Sullivans had built their lives, now joined by a fourth who'd chosen to make their story her own. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the guests had settled for the night and Tommy was absorbed in his homework, Elena would sit by Clear Creek and sing, not from pain or loneliness as she had that first morning, but from joy and gratitude, for the unexpected grace of second chances and the courage to claim them. The giant cowboy had indeed given her everything, not through grand gestures or material gifts, but through the simple offering of space to heal, time to choose, and love without conditions. And in return, Elena had given him something equally precious, the return of music to a house that had been silent too long, and the promise that some songs, once begun, would never end. Hashtag Part 5. Epilogue. 5 years later, the morning sun cast long shadows across Sullivan Family Ranch as Elena stepped onto the wraparound porch of their expanded main house, cradling a steaming cup of coffee and watching the controlled chaos of another busy summer day beginning. 5 years had transformed not just the ranch, but the entire landscape of their lives in ways she could never have imagined during those first uncertain days by Clear Creek. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the main yard where Tommy, now 13 and towering like his uncle, was leading a group of young guests through morning chores. His voice had deepened over the past year, but his patience with younger children remained as infinite as ever. Elena smiled as she watched him carefully guide a nervous 7-year-old through the process of collecting eggs, his natural teaching ability evident in every gentle correction and word of encouragement. "Morning, beautiful." Marcus's deep voice came from behind her, accompanied by the warmth of his arms circling her waist. Even after 3 years of marriage, Elena felt her pulse quicken at his touch, amazed that she'd found someone who made her feel both completely secure and deliciously thrilled. "Good morning yourself, handsome," she replied, leaning back against his solid chest. "How did the sunrise cattle check go?" "Better than expected. The new calves are all healthy, and I think we're going to have our best breeding season yet." Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "More importantly, I have news that's going to make your day." Elena turned in his arms, intrigued by the excitement she could hear in his voice. "What kind of news?" Marcus grinned, pulling a letter from his shirt pocket. "This came in yesterday's mail. Remember that feature article the Denver Post did on us last month?" Elena nodded, recalling the journalist who'd spent 3 days at the ranch documenting their agritourism success story. The article had painted Sullivan Family Ranch as a model for sustainable rural tourism, highlighting both their environmental practices and their commitment to authentic experiences. "Well," Marcus continued, his grin widening, "it caught the attention of someone pretty important. We've been selected as one of 3 finalists for the National Agritourism Excellence Award. Elena, if we win this, it comes with a $50,000 grant and national media coverage that could book us solid for the next 2 years." Elena felt her knees go weak with shock and excitement. The National Agritourism Excellence Award was the industry's highest honor, recognizing operations that demonstrated exceptional innovation, sustainability, and guest satisfaction. To even be considered was an incredible achievement, but to be named a finalist felt almost surreal. "Are you serious?" she breathed, taking the letter with trembling hands to read the official confirmation for herself. The letterhead was genuine, the language formal and congratulatory. This was really happening. "Dead serious," Marcus said, his pride in their accomplishment evident in every word. "Elena, we did this. Together. We took a struggling cattle ranch and turned it into something that's being recognized nationally as a model for rural tourism." Elena felt tears of joy and pride welling in her eyes as the magnitude of their achievement settled over her. 5 years ago, she'd been a broken woman running from a shattered life, with no idea what her future might hold. Now she was co-owner of an award-nominated business, married to her best friend and deepest love, and mother to a remarkable teenager who'd grown into everything his parents had hoped he could become. "Mama Elena." The excited voice belonged to 6-year-old Sophia Chun, daughter of Pastor David and Mary Chun, who'd become like family to the Sullivans over the years. The little girl came running across the yard, her dark braids flying behind her as she raced toward the porch. Elena's heart swelled at the casual way Sophia called her Mama Elena, a title the child had bestowed on her own initiative 2 years earlier. In a community as tight-knit as Copper Ridge, the lines between biological and chosen family often blurred in the most beautiful ways. "What's got you so excited this morning, Mija?" Elena asked, automatically switching to the Spanish endearment that came naturally with Sophia, whose parents had encouraged her bilingual development through Elena's informal tutoring. "Tommy says the new horses arrived last night, and one of them is small enough for kids to ride safely," Sophia announced breathlessly. "Can I see them, please? I've been practicing my riding position just like you taught me." Elena glanced at Marcus, who nodded his approval. The arrival of 2 new horses specially trained for children had been part of their expansion plan for the current season. After 3 years of relying on their older, larger horses for all riding activities, they'd finally been able to invest in animals specifically suited for their youngest guests. "Of course you can see them," Elena said, ruffling Sophia's hair affectionately. "But first, have you finished your chores at home?" Sophia nodded eagerly. "Mama said I could come help with the horses if I fed the chickens and help Papa with the garden. Everything's done." Elena smiled at the child's enthusiasm, remembering her own excitement at discovering the world of ranch life. Sophia had become a regular fixture at Sullivan Ranch during summers, her parents grateful for the agricultural education, and Elena and Marcus happy to have her bright energy adding to their extended family atmosphere. As Sophia skipped off toward the stable area where Tommy was leading his group, Elena felt a familiar pang of longing mixed with contentment. She and Marcus had been trying to start a family of their own for over a year, but so far their efforts hadn't been successful. Dr. Mitchell had assured them that there was no medical reason for concern, that these things sometimes took time, but Elena couldn't help feeling the ache of empty arms when she watched Marcus's natural way with children. "Penny for your thoughts," Marcus said gently, his perceptive gaze noting the slight shadow that had crossed her expression. Elena hesitated, not wanting to dampen their celebration of the award nomination with her private disappointments. But their relationship had been built on honesty from the beginning, and she'd learned that sharing burdens made them lighter rather than heavier. "I was just thinking about Sophia calling me Mama Elena," she said quietly, "and wondering if I'll ever hear a child of our own call me that." Marcus's expression softened with understanding. He pulled her closer, his hands settling protectively over her still flat abdomen in a gesture that had become habitual during their months of hoping. "Elena, love, it will happen when it's meant to happen," he said quietly. "And until then, we have Tommy and Sophia and all the children who come through our programs. We're already making a difference in young lives." Elena nodded, knowing he was right, but still feeling the particular ache that came with wanting to create life with the person you loved most. "I know, and I'm grateful for all of it. She trailed off, not sure how to articulate the complex emotions involved. "You just want to give me a baby," Marcus finished gently. "Elena, you've already given me everything I could ever want. A thriving business, a happy home, Tommy thriving under your guidance, and most importantly, yourself. If we're blessed with biological children, that will be wonderful. If we're not, we'll find other ways to build our family." His words eased the tight knot of anxiety in Elena's chest. This was what she loved most about Marcus, his ability to see the bigger picture, to find contentment in what they had while remaining open to future possibilities. He'd taught her that happiness wasn't about checking items off a predetermined list, but about embracing the life that unfolded before them. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you beyond reason?" Elena asked, rising on her toes to kiss him. Soundly. "Not since yesterday," Marcus replied with mock seriousness. "I was beginning to worry." Their romantic moment was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar pickup truck coming up the main drive. Elena recognized it immediately as belonging to Sheriff Henderson, though his visits these days were purely social rather than official business. Bill Henderson had become one of their strongest supporters in the community, often bringing his own grandchildren to participate in ranch activities when they visited from California. "Bill's early today," Marcus observed as the sheriff climbed out of his truck. Wonder what brings him by before breakfast. Sheriff Henderson approached the porch with a grin that suggested good news rather than problems. At 65, he'd announced his intention to retire at the end of the year, though he showed no signs of slowing down in his duties or his involvement in community affairs. "Morning, you two," he called as he climbed the porch steps. "Hope, I'm not interrupting anything important, but I've got news that couldn't wait for a more civilized hour." "What kind of news?" Elena asked, still holding Marcus's hand as they faced their unexpected visitor. "The kind that's going to make your day even better than that award nomination letter you're probably still celebrating," Bill said with a knowing wink. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when Mary Chin can't contain her excitement about her friend's success. Elena laughed, not surprised that news of their nomination had already spread through Copper Ridge's efficient gossip network. Mary Chun, despite her many virtues, had never been able to keep exciting news to herself for more than a few hours. "So what's your news, Bill?" Marcus asked with the easy familiarity of old friendship. "Well," Bill said, settling into one of the porch chairs with the air of someone preparing to tell a good story. "You know how the county's been struggling with budget cuts and reduced services, especially for youth programs?" Elena nodded, aware that the economic challenges facing rural Colorado had forced difficult decisions about community resources. Several after-school programs had been eliminated, and the county's summer camp for at-risk youth had been canceled. For the past 2 years, the county commissioners met yesterday to discuss alternatives, Bill continued, and your names came up repeatedly as potential partners for a new kind of youth program. They're impressed with what you've accomplished here, with how you've managed to combine education, environmental awareness, and character building in your guest programs. Elena felt a flutter of excitement as she began to understand where this conversation was heading. She and Marcus had discussed the possibility of expanding their offerings to include programs for local children, but they'd assumed it would be years before such opportunities might arise. "What exactly are they proposing?" Marcus asked, his business instincts engaging as he recognized a potential opportunity. "A partnership program," Bill explained, pulling out a folder Elena hadn't noticed him carrying. "The county would provide funding and transportation for at-risk youth to participate in week-long ranch programs during summer months. Nothing fancy or expensive, just solid experiences that teach responsibility, environmental stewardship, and practical skills." Elena's mind immediately began racing with possibilities. They'd seen how transformative ranch experiences could be for city children who'd never interacted with large animals or wide-open spaces. The potential impact on local children who might be struggling with academic, social, or family challenges was even more exciting. "How many children would we be talking about?" Elena asked, her program director instincts automatically assessing logistics and capacity. "Probably 20 to 30 kids per summer, divided into smaller groups for manageable programming," Bill replied. "The county's particularly interested in your bilingual capabilities, Elena. There's a significant Latino population in the county seat that's been underserved by traditional programs." Elena felt her heart swell with the possibility of using her cultural background and language skills to help children who might otherwise lack access to enriching summer experiences. She'd never forgotten how transformative educational opportunities had been in her own childhood, thanks to her father's commitment to her development. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" Marcus asked practically, though Elena could see the interest growing in his expression. "If you're interested, they'd like to meet with you next month to discuss details and develop a formal proposal," Bill said. "The goal would be to launch a pilot program next summer, assuming funding comes through and you're willing to take on the additional responsibility." Elena looked at Marcus, seeing her own excitement reflected in his eyes. This was exactly the kind of expansion they'd dreamed about, one that served their community while building on their existing strengths and infrastructure. "We're definitely interested," Elena said before Marcus could respond, then caught herself. I'm interested. Marcus, what do you think?" Marcus grinned at her enthusiasm. "I think my brilliant wife just found our next project. Bill, you can tell the commissioners we'd be honored to explore this partnership." As Sheriff Henderson departed with promises to arrange the initial meeting, Elena felt the day's earlier excitement about the award nomination pale in comparison to this new possibility. the chance to impact local children's lives, to provide opportunities for growth and learning to kids who might not otherwise have them, aligned perfectly with her deepest values and interests. You realize what we're getting ourselves into, don't you? Marcus asked as they watched Bill's truck disappear down the drive. At-risk youth programming is going to be more challenging than anything we've done so far. Elena nodded, understanding the complexity they'd be taking on. At-risk children often came with trauma histories, behavioral challenges, and family situations that required careful, patient approaches. But they also offered the greatest potential for transformation, for lives genuinely changed by positive experiences and caring adult guidance. I know, she said quietly. But Marcus, think about what this could mean. We'd be giving kids like Tommy was, children who've experienced loss and uncertainty, a chance to discover their own strength and resilience. We'd be showing them that they matter, that adults believe in their potential. Marcus's expression softened as he recognized the deeper motivation behind her enthusiasm. Elena's commitment to helping children overcome challenges stemmed not just from her professional experience, but from her own journey of healing and rediscovery. She understood firsthand how transformative it could be when caring adults invested in someone's potential. Plus, Elena added with a grin, it would give us more children around the ranch year-round. Practice for when we start our own family. Marcus laughed, pulling her close for another kiss. Elena Sullivan, you continue to amaze me with your capacity for love and your vision for what we can accomplish together. As they stood on their porch looking out over the ranch that had become so much more than either of them had originally envisioned, Elena marveled at the unexpected directions life could take. 5 years ago, she'd been singing alone by a creek, broken and running from a past that had seemed to define her future. Now she was building programs that would touch hundreds of lives, married to her best friend and greatest love, and on the verge of opportunities that aligned perfectly with her deepest values. The afternoon brought a steady stream of activity, as their current guest families participated in various ranch programs. Elena found herself moving seamlessly between roles, program coordinator ensuring smooth operations, teacher helping a struggling reader, translator for a Spanish-speaking family, and surrogate aunt to the children who'd become regular visitors. As evening approached and the last of the day's activities wound down, Elena made her way to the spot by Clear Creek where her life had changed forever. It had become her private retreat, the place she came when she needed to think or simply appreciate how far she'd traveled from that desperate morning 5 years ago. She settled on the same fallen log where she'd sat that first day, listening to the familiar sound of water moving over stones and breathing in the pine-scented air that had become the scent of home. In the distance, she could hear Marcus and Tommy working with the horses, their voices carrying easily across the evening stillness. Elena closed her eyes and began to hum the Spanish lullaby that had first drawn Marcus to her, but now the melody carried none of the sorrow and desperation of that original morning. Instead, it flowed with gratitude, with joy, with the deep contentment of someone who'd found not just a place to belong but a purpose worth pursuing. I thought I might find you here. Marcus's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and understanding. Elena opened her eyes to find him approaching through the trees, his massive frame moving with the easy grace she'd come to love. Just taking a moment to appreciate how much has changed, she said, making room for him on the log. Marcus settled beside her, automatically pulling her against his side in the way that had become second nature. 5 years ago, did you ever imagine this? He asked, gesturing toward the ranch visible through the trees, where lights were beginning to twinkle in windows and the sounds of a thriving operation could be heard. Not in my wildest dreams, Elena admitted. I thought my life was essentially over, that I'd never trust anyone again, never contribute anything meaningful to the world. I was just trying to survive each day. And now, Elena considered the question, thinking about the award nomination, the potential youth program, the life she and Marcus were building together. Now I feel like I'm living instead of just surviving. Like every day offers new possibilities instead of just new ways to avoid pain. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking gently through her hair. Elena, I need you to know that. You saved me too. Not just the ranch or my financial situation, but me personally. I was drowning in responsibility and loneliness, convinced I was failing Tommy, failing my family's legacy. You didn't just join our life. You helped me remember how to actually live it. Elena turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his expression and feeling her heart swell with love for this remarkable man who'd shown her what healthy partnership could look like. We saved each other, she said softly. And now we're building something that can help save other people too. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above, Elena felt a deep peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, the ongoing work of building their programs and their life together. But tonight, sitting by the creek where her real life had begun, surrounded by the sounds and sense of home, she was exactly where she belonged. The giant cowboy who'd heard her sing that first morning had indeed given her everything. Not material wealth or grand gestures, but something far more precious. The space to heal, the time to choose, and the love to build a future neither of them could have imagined alone. And in return, Elena had given him her heart, her voice, and her commitment to the life they were creating together, one day at a time. As they walked back toward the house hand in hand, Elena began to sing again, not the lullaby of sorrow that had marked her arrival, but a new song of gratitude and hope, of second chances seized and love freely given. It was the sound of a woman who'd found her way home at last. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.